Well, hello, folks. I welcome you to another one of our conversations on racial reconciliation with Dr. Andre and Mrs. Petrina Branch. We've got some other friends from the church here, Jen Fuentesilla, Annika Doty, Anna Amaral, who are a part of the conversation today and have been engaged in this conversation. If you haven't already, go and watch any of the prior conversations that we have had, and I hope that it will be encouraging and inspiring. I want to thank the branches again for the amount of time that they have taken to be a part of these conversations, to really help us understand some issues and to help us as a church community to engage this. Now, I know some people would say, well, this is the, I don't know, 5th, 6th, 7th conversation. How many more are there going to be? We hope forever. And in one way, we hope forever. In one way, we hope it doesn't have to be forever. But that those forever conversations wouldn't only be with the branches. It would be between us and everyone who we meet, every child who we have the opportunity to engage with, every place in which we go, that we are always talking about this subject and about how we might bring equity in every way into our world. So it's important, it's needed, and the conversation continues as it does today. So thanks for joining us. We're going to begin. Jen's is going to ask the first question and kick off our conversation here. So Jen?
Yes. So my question is, as a fellow parent raising 2 young women of color, I'm curious as to what conversations you have had with your daughter, Armani. I often reflect on the words, "You have to work twice as hard to get half as far." Could you share any talking points, if any, you have used to engage in conversations about race relations?
Well, I think I'll start. When I saw this question, I didn't automatically think of like a particular conversation with Armani about race relations or being a Black child or anything like that. And I think part of it is that our, approach is that you address things kind of all the time as they happen and they occur. There isn't like sort of like the conversation. It starts as a young child, and I'm talking generally, when kids are in a playground and a child says something, either your child says something or something said to her that needs to be addressed. Maybe it was insensitive, maybe it was mean, maybe it was just, racist, whatever it is, you address it at that time. As you see things that come up in the news, obviously George Floyd situation is an obvious example. Then you have that conversation about racism and police brutality and those things that flow from that. So it's not like a big conversation that we've had, but I think it's important, in my view, to just answer their questions as they come up. When you see something that needs to be addressed, to talk about it, and to just be, I'd say, proactive and exposing your children to different cultures, activities that are inclusive, children of all races and ethnic groups, providing materials in your homes, whether it's storybooks, history books that reflect on the history of this country. So that's, I guess, my opening sort of comments on this topic.
I think it's important for you folks to know. I mean, you asked how we approach this issue, this conversation with our daughter. Remember that we are activists, if you would say, you might say. Both of us are very definitely um, racially aware, race conscious. Our lives involve the NAACP daily. Armani has been to NAACP meetings from the beginning, not only locally, but nationally. She has been to the national convention a number of times. And so dealing with, knowing about issues of racism, race bias, valuing diversity, it's just been a part of her life. As Trina said, we're not anticipating any one conversation, the talk. We talk about these issues on a regular basis, and we don't wait necessarily for Armani to ask questions. When there is something that we think she needs to know, when something happens, we initiate the conversation. Trina mentioned making sure that our children are involved with people, know people who are outside their racial group, different kinds of people. As all of you know, your church is a predominantly white place, but we had no hesitation at all about involving Armani in the music ministry at your church. When one day Trina was driving down, was it H Street?
H Street.
And saw the sign that said, you know, there's a choir opportunity for children, sign up your children, whatever. And she said, you know, there's a choir, there's a church down the street that wants to invite children to sing in a choir. And so Armani began singing in the choir. We hope, and I think we've been successful in sending the message that we are a multicultural society, and we interact with all kinds of people, no matter what their race, ethnicity is. We're humans. And certainly we acknowledge differences and racial differences, but we are involved with, have relationship with lots of different types of folks, racially, ethnically. It's just a part of our lives. And we would encourage any parents to do the same. You need to reach out to people who are not like yourselves, not only for your children, but for yourself, for the betterment of the society in which we live.
I'd like to add on. I just wanted to say that I work with young people. I am a young person. And I feel like often, sometimes parents need reminding that they are not the only people who have influence on their child. I learned about justice. I became a community organizer, you know, definitely from the influences of my church and of my family, but also from the friends that I had in the school that I went to. And so I think something that's really important that we remember, especially as our young people become adolescents and teenagers, is that young people have historically propelled almost every movement for justice. And so it's important that we also listen to them when they bring a new angle of the conversation that we may not see. I know, you know, because of coronavirus, I moved back in with my parents, and it became a learning curve for us to realize that my parents know a lot of things that I don't know about, but I also know a lot of things that they don't know about, and that we can learn from each other. And it doesn't have to, they don't have to feel the responsibility of telling me what is right or what is wrong, because I also know, and I also have a perspective. And you know, I've been a community organizer for 4 years now, and that's something that I'm now teaching my mom how to do, and that I know how to do well. So I think it's also important to remember that our young people know something and that we should listen to them as well. And then also, and that's for like older, you know, teenagers, but especially for like elementary schoolers, something that I always think about is um, when we talk about race, it often feels like it's something that's like bad and hard to talk about. And it's true, there are massive injustice and history of violence and things that are very, very painful for our communities. But there is also something that is so beautiful about being a person of color and loving who we are. And so I feel like so often the conversation is geared toward what is so hard about being a Latina or being a Chicana, or what is so hard about, you know, being a person of color, when you know, the moments that I feel most empowered to fight for justice and to fight for freedom is when I talk about what do I love about being Chicana? What do we love about being women of color, and how using that to really inspire us to share that with each other and use it to continue the movement.
I mean,
I,
go ahead.
I just want to add, for people who may not know, the pastor has mentioned that these conversations about race have gone beyond your church. So other people may not know that our daughter is 12 years old. This daughter that we're talking about is still a very young child. And I want you to know that making conversations about race normal, regular, consistent, a matter of course in your home, in my view, will make your children surprise you. That is, they are soaking up all the time who we are, what we are, even when we're not paying attention to what we're teaching them. I remember so vividly a day a number of years ago, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. My wife and Armani came back from the pool, and she said, "We met a lady at the pool and she wants to meet you." I said, "Oh, really? Well, why did she want to meet me?" She said, "Well, Armani had some interaction with her son, and after talking with Armani, she wants to meet you." So I went to the pool, I think the next day or some point, and this woman, you don't remember them?
I'm telling you, as you go on the story, I'll remember. No, I think I remember the people. I just don't remember the conversation.
Well, I went to the pool a day or two later, and this mother and her husband, they were visiting from, I think, Massachusetts or somewhere, but the father lives here in Eastlake, and so they were at the pool with their very young child. I guess the boy was 5 years old, 6 years old, something like that. And she said, Armani started engaging this child in some discussion about race. And it was at least 4 or more years ago. So maybe when she was 8, 7, it was just a matter of course. And this woman said to me, how did you do that? How did you get her to talk about race, know about race? I said, I don't know that we did anything special. You know, race is a part of who we are. It's a significant and critical aspect of our lives. And so we talk about it like we talk about teeth and air and vegetables, and it's just who we are. They were just enthralled, you know. The husband is a mixed race person, white, black. The mother is an Indian woman from India. They are now raising a mixed race child. And of course, they're wondering, you know, how do we position this child for success and survival in a world where we are constantly in racial crisis? So when they heard our daughter easily talking about race, I don't know if the child asked the other boy, what race are you? Or I don't know what she said, but she talked about race, and this mother wanted to know, how did you do that? Well, it's just who we are.
Yes. Yeah, which is a great witness to us and to the church folks who are hearing this, engaged in this conversation, and to the wider folks that can we all get to that someday, that to just understand that this is who we are, and part of our faith is having this conversation always and everywhere. So I have two thoughts. One, Petrina, I'm so excited to know that the front marquee sign actually worked on someone, that you drove down the street and saw an advertisement and you responded to it. So
Yes.
we're always wondering about that. So I'm excited about that. But second, Anna, I'm curious. So Dr. Branch used the term, I think racially conscious is the term that, one of the terms that he used. And
Yes.
in the high school program, in the program that you developed for your high school, obviously you knew that you would be dealing with students who came from a more racially consciousness, and some who were not at all aware. And was there differences in the way that you tried to get at that conversation?
Yeah, I think one thing that is important to note is that in the fight for justice and the fight for liberation, and like the education part of that fight where we have to learn and listen, is that there's never a point where you're like, all right, like I did it, I know everything there is to know about race, I know everything there is to know about justice. It's something that we constantly need to be building, and we constantly need to be building our consciousness. So I think that was really the way that I came into those conversations is, and I encourage a lot of educators to do the same, is go into these conversations being honest that you don't know everything. You can't know everything. We only know truly our lived perspective. And what we can do is listen and educate ourselves and learn about history, but that we constantly need to be doing the learning. And so as for different perspectives of race consciousness, the main thing that we centered on was the lived experiences of our students. I came from a high school that was a Title I high school, which means that a majority of students were low-income students, and we had over 85% students of color, majority Latino and Filipino. And so a lot of our students were experts in what it means to have the Latino or the Latina experience. They are experts in what it is to have the Filipino experience. And so using that to really understand ourselves and understand our history and then learn about each other, we were able to see that a lot of our struggles overlap. And even when they don't overlap, we have a responsibility to show up for our brothers and sisters, no matter what race they are. So for me, I think the first step is always like learning about yourself and finding pride and love within who you are in your community, in your culture, and your race, and then using that to recognize and to extend that love towards other people. But yeah, it's important to remember that like our students, our young people have experiences that are relevant to race, because like you said, it's a part of who they are. Whether we recognize it or not, they probably have had experiences in which they are aware of their race. We know that Black and Brown students and young people have an awareness of race by the time they are very, very young children. So I think tapping into that and like remembering that they are experts on their experience and just using that and growing that.
Yeah, good. Thank you. And Anka, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would say some of the conversations that you and I have had, it seems to me like you stand in the middle of this race consciousness world sometimes, and whether it's work or other places, in sort of combating some of the unconsciousness in our world, and then also trying to be an advocate and a partner with folks at the same time. And it seems to me that you find yourself bouncing between those two polarities. And I know you had a question about this issue and about workplace and those sorts of things. And so why don't you ask your question and we'll see where it goes from there.
Okay. Yeah, well, Brian, I'd agree with you. That's kind of where I find myself as at this point in my life, no longer physically a young person, but still young at heart and a lifelong learner and wanting to, just continue to educate myself and try to maybe be an advocate or an ally, somebody that can kind of stand in the gap and try to bridge ideas and feelings. So I also wanted to mention that I'm part of a group recently since George Floyd called the San Diego chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's a national organization, but there's a really active San Diego chapter here. They also have a North County chapter, and they've been putting on some really great workshops and events where, their whole feeling is, as white people, it's up to us to stand in that gap and come alongside Black-led organizations to do this work. And so that's been really informative and eye-opening.
What's the name of that organization again, Monica?
Showing Up for Racial Justice. So they go by the Surge, SURJ.
Who is the president of the chapter now?
I'm blanking on her name. I can't recall. It's a lady, and I could see her face, but yeah, I don't remember her name.
Yeah,
when I was president of the NAACP, the president of Surge and I collaborated on some work. That is it's a wonderful organization, a powerful group of people.
Yeah, I'm really finding it and just the whole idea of this is not our fight as white people, but it is in terms of standing up and coming alongside our brothers and sisters in whatever Black-led organizations, whether BLM or NAACP, which I proudly am now a card-carrying member. Thanks to you guys.
All right, great.
What did you mean when you said this is not our fight as white people? What does that mean?
I mean, it is our fight, but it's not our lived reality, right? And it is our responsibility to come alongside, but not to be the ones like directing the process or the conversations. It's we just can be allies because we can't truly know what it is that you guys live through, right? So just about making
you guys meaning Black people
of color. Yeah,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a struggle that a lot of people, like especially white people, have trouble realizing, is that like our goal is not to have white people be the face of the movement, because again, like it is not their movement. It's their responsibility to contribute to the movement and to be allies to the movement and to be 100% there, but listening to the people who are leading the movement and following in the path that people of color, like you said, the ones with the lived experiences are telling us is the right way to go.
Yeah, and that's what kind of attracted me to it initially was, I'm kind of the person where I see something that's wrong. I just want to get in there and I want to fix it, right, myself. And I'm like, okay, let's do this, let's do that. But this has been an opportunity for me to just have a dose of reality and say, hey, this is really not your gig. It is in terms of being able to be an ally, but we have to let the people that have the most invested take the lead. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me to go, yes, you can be responsible for it, you can be involved and be an important part of the movement, but it's ours to come alongside and not to try to get in front.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Now,
So
Petrina,
you had a
I think I saw you wanted to say
Oh.
something. So let's go back to that. But then also, I would be curious to hear. We've talked about this before, but any further thoughts about allyship and about the place of Anglos in racial reconciliation and how best to be allies.
I had a further comment on the first question. I just want to quickly say
Sure.
that. So getting back to what we might tell Armani about, you know, race or being a Black person, without remembering a specific conversation, there are some sort of general concepts that I sort of think about when I think about, you know, being a Black parent. You know, first of all, just making sure your child understands the history of this country, you know, the systemic racism, you know, what has happened in the past that now reflects on what we see currently. So I think that's important for her. And so I'm always very conscious of teaching her history and teaching her the contributions of Black people. And, you know, for example, you know, when Congressman Lewis, John Lewis died, I mean, she already knew who he was a little bit because we had watched the movie Selma a number of times, but you know, we had conversations about who he was and what his contribution was. We watched the service where he was brought Lion State at the Capitol in the Rotunda. So she was with us when we watched that. And so she could get, you know, very good understanding of, you know, how important he was and what his contributions were. And while that service was going on, we were also, you know, talking to her about the history that was behind his contribution.
And letting her know who the people were in the room.
So that's just an example of sort of everyday interactions and experiences that children should have, where, you know, they're seeing something happening and then you kind of give them context for it.
Yes.
In addition to the history and making sure she knows that, letting her know that things can change and that she can have a contribution in that change. So it's not just this, you know, whoa, it's me, everything's bad, we have this history, but also letting her know the progress that's been made and who contributes to that progress, and that she can even, she has a role in that progress by just speaking up, you know, understanding, you know, how she could contribute to a situation. And then also it's important to, you know, build up self-esteem. And, you know, as a Black child, there's so many messages and images and situations in the world that can like damage their psyche and their system and just make them feel like they're not worthy of. And so it's just very important to just build up her self-esteem, know that she's brilliant and powerful and that she is entitled to all the good things that this world has to offer, and provide her with the skills and experience and knowledge to help her attain those things. So those are like the concepts that I think about when I think about raising a Black child. And when I think about how she can be a change agent, an example that comes to mind is the 17-year-old child who videotaped the George Floyd murder. You may or may not have noticed, but that videotape was steady. It was clear. She did not move. She did not waver. She understood that there was a moment that needed to be captured, and she did her job. She captured that. I'm sure she was scared. She was terrified. She saw someone being murdered in front of her eyes. She probably was scared that those police officers might come after her, but she did it, and she changed the world. And so I think that all children, for example, my daughter, I told her that. I told her that 17-year-old girl changed the world because she had the power of the videotape, the power of the cell phone. So I think Armani and all children should know that in whatever situation they have an opportunity to speak up. If they see something wrong and they have a cell phone, videotape it. So those are the concepts that I think about when I think about educating and preparing a child of color for this. So that's what I just want to add on that question. I know we've moved on to the next question of allyship. I wanted to get that point in.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yes, thank you.
When I think about being an ally, what it means to be an ally, the first thought that comes to mind, you know, after there is the necessary realization, Annika, that white folks, if we're talking about racism and a movement towards racial justice, the folks who are allies are people who are not people of color. And so those folks need to listen first. They need to do a lot of listening to what the issues are, how people have suffered, what the experiences historically and presently are. They need to do a lot of listening. They need to do a lot of learning about what has gone on. And we've talked about this previously, about educating oneself about what the issues are and not having the expectation that it is the job of people of color to educate you about what is happening. Then ask the people on the front lines, ask the people who are leading the effort, what's the best role for me? You know, if it's, and I've said this before in this conversation, if we're talking about sexism, I am certainly not the one to lead that issue, that movement. My mouth is not the mouthpiece for that movement. I need to ask women, how can I best help in this effort to help our world understand gender discrimination, sexism in particular? What should I do? What can be my role? And I need to be ready for people to say, go here, go there, do this, do that, or just sit down and learn some more. And white folks need to do that, in my view, with respect to race. I was very fortunate as the president of the NAACP a few years ago, when a number of white folks joined the NAACP, and they were of the opinion, that is, they came to me and said, we know, and they did this individually, not as a group, we know we should not be the voice, the mouthpiece, the head. We want to know what we can do to help. And I thought, these folks have the right attitude. They are coming, wanting to listen, wanting to learn, wanting to know how they can help, not wanting to take over. You know, and that is a very strong temptation, because white folks have been in charge for generations in the history of this country. The research is clear that when white folks and Black folks work on projects together, it is the assumption of white people and Black people that white folks will take over, become the leaders, and get the work done. That is the way it's been. And so it is very, very difficult for white folks to then come into an organization and say, I want to hear from you. I want to take direction from someone who is not white. Listening, learning, asking, what can I do to be helpful?
Yeah.
That's how I'd start.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
So I think something that's really important as well for allies is to ask the hard questions and to ask themselves and their communities the really hard questions. Questions like, how do I directly benefit from white supremacy? How, does my existence contribute to white supremacy? Even when I'm not trying, even when I am a Christian, even when I claim to love my neighbor as myself, how do I continue to unknowingly or unconsciously, benefit from white supremacy and perpetuate white supremacy? That is a hard conversation to have. It's an ugly truth that we have to look at.
Yes.
But it's an ugly truth that people of color live every single day. And so it's important that allies really do the work of asking themselves those questions and coming at it from a place not of defense. I feel like a lot of people come in being like, but I'm not racist. I am not racist. It doesn't matter if you're not actively racist, because systemic racism exists. One of my, favorite quotes to describe institutional racism to people is that institutional racism is like those moving walkways, those like flat escalators at the airport. Even if you are just standing still on that moving walkway, it continues to move in the same direction. It continues to move in the same direction as the active racist who is sprinting on that walkway. You can even turn around and look the opposite way, but you're still going to be moving in the same direction.
That's a great example.
It's only until you look the opposite way and sprint in the opposite direction that progress happens. And that's hard work, and it's ugly truths that we have to face, but it's the only way that progress and eventually liberation will be achieved.
Yeah, I really like that example. And I just want to add too that when I think about allies and when I've read things about it, a key word related to being ally is action. And a lot of companies, had their public relations people, issue statements about Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff after the George Floyd situation. And that's great. But at the end of the day, what action are people who claim to want to address this situation going to take? Will these same companies be more proactive about diversifying their workforce? Will these same companies be promoting people of color and black people and other people of color? Will these same companies be doing other things in the community that might be harmful to communities of color, whether it's environmental issues or other things like that? So, these sort of symbolic gestures are great. They're part of the issue, they're nice, but at the end of the day, come on, what action are people going to take? Mm-hmm. And, on the individual level, not the company level, allies should look at the environments that they're in and try to be an agent of change. If you, in those environments, whether or not it's at your workforce and you see that there's not diversity in your workforce, raising that the next meeting to say, we're about to hire somebody, can we expand the applicant pool here? So wherever you are, on the workforce, in your department, if you hear or see policies that tend to hurt groups, maybe they're inadvertent, but the effect of them is to keep others out or discourage others speaking up. So I think it's very important for allies to take action.
Yeah, and think about like what does the privilege that comes with allyship and how can that be leveraged for the movement? And it's like a really common one is like, what does it mean for a person of color to stand at the front line of a protest where they will face brutality from police? And what does it mean for a white person to stand between the police and the people of color on the front line of that protest? What kind of privilege does the literal skin on their body give them that they can then give fully to a movement? That's an important thing to consider.
Yes.
There is, it's probably a famous video by now. I don't know if any of you've seen it, but it is a video of a Black person in I believe it's a city council meeting, who speaks out, who at one point gets on top of a table because the police have been called in to quash that person, to get that person to stop talking. And white people in the room surround that individual. And the police, of course, are almost immobilized because they don't want to touch this white person. They don't want to touch these white people. And those white people surround that Black individual so that he can continue speaking. And the police officers, the guards, can't get to him. This is a beautiful example of what Anna was just saying, in my view. White people can use their physical bodies to protect people of color on the front lines, and they can use their influence as white folks to protect people of color on their jobs, in their schools, in their neighborhoods. They understand the importance of protecting these people so that their voices can be heard. This is absolutely critical. And well, I've seen it at work in San Diego. The examples are there's too long to explain, but the idea is that white folks with their influence and their physical bodies can protect people of color so that the message is allowed to get out. Have any of you seen this video that I'm talking about?
I've
No.
seen this one similar and heard of some things here in town, even within the last couple of years. In
I'm gonna send it to Pastor Parcell, and then maybe he can make it available. But it just grips you, and it illustrates so beautifully exactly how allyship can work. Anna, have you seen it?
I have not, but I've seen a lot of like in organizing, that's a tactic that is often used.
Yes.
Even like in different situations. Yeah, like in different situations.
It didn't just
like,
happen. These people planned when the guards try to shut me down, there will be these white allies who protect me as I talk.
Yeah, and same with like other forms of oppression. Like, what does it mean for people who are documented to be at the edge of a protest where they will be the first to be arrested, and protecting undocumented people at the center of that protest, because we know that the privilege of having documentation in this country means that an entirely different situation if I were to get arrested versus someone else.
Exactly.
Yes. You folks have this powerhouse in your church.
Indeed we do, and we are thankful for it, and thankful for her voice. So Dr. Branch, please, I'll search for that video, but if you find that video, send it to me as well. And this is a good point for me to remind folks that as we're talking about allyship and talking about educating ourselves, that underneath this video, wherever this video is played on YouTube, or if you see it through the church website, underneath in the description box, there will be a link onto our website that contains all of the resources that have been mentioned in all of the conversations so far. There are books, there are newspaper articles, there are academic articles, there's feature films, there are documentaries, all kinds of material. So that this conversation hopefully is the beginning, perhaps, or a continuation of study and learning for you. But there are lots of resources that we continue to provide, and the video will be one of those once we find it, so that everyone who's watching can take a next step and continue educating yourself. So just want to remind us of that. And believe it or not, you know, an hour goes by so quickly, and I want to get to the end of our conversation. And Anna was asking some questions sort of offline as we were talking earlier. You know, a powerhouse voice, an important voice in our church, but a young voice compared to the rest of us, right? And going to be fighting this fight for a long time. And how is it that we stay engaged and inspired? And so Anna, you could put that question into better words than I can. And why don't we throw that out there for conversation, and we'll sort of end in that place, a place where all of us can perhaps gain some inspiration.
Yeah, one thing that I really wanted to add really quick about allyship is I saw this comic the other day that said, just because you read about anti-racism doesn't make you an anti-racist. And it was like, fill in anti-racism with anything. Just because you read a lot about rock climbing doesn't make you a rock climber. Just because you read a lot about conducting doesn't make you a conductor. So action as a keyword.
You can read a lot of recipes for food too, but you won't get full.
Are you going to be a good cook? My question that I wanted to ask was, I think, more targeted towards, you know, people who are continuing this fight. Like I said, you all have been in this fight for a lot longer than I have. But even just in my short 4 years in organizing, I have, you know, experienced moments of burnout. I mean, earlier this week was one for me, where it felt like this fight is so long, and it's hard to find sustenance within the fight. And so I was just wondering, and this is for everyone, what are ways that we can continue to find joy and love and hope and sustenance in, you know, the marathon of this this fight? Because again, this is not a movement that's a sprint. It's going to go on for generations and generations, just the way that it has been continuing for generations. So how do you all find hope and sustenance in this work?
I immediately think it is important to walk away from the fight every now and again and rest and take time to take care of ourselves. We need to do one of 10 things that we enjoy every single day. We need to find some 10 things that we enjoy and do one of them every day. The fight is real. The agony is real, but we need to rest, because racism and dealing with it has emotional effects, psychological effects, sometimes negative physical effect. It can destroy us if we don't take time to step back and take care of ourselves. We need to identify people to whom we can go and be real and share our own frustrations. Maybe we need to rage, we need to cry, we need to scream, holler, Some people cuss and carry on. And those people that we identify to hear that need to be people who will love us anyway. They need to be people that we trust, who will not conclude we have lost our minds. We need to emote. We need to say how real this struggle is and how it can negatively affect us. I mean, that's not all, but that's some.
Anaguli, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to share just on an individual level. This past week, I was communicating with one of my employees, right? We're all remote from home, so we're Skyping each other. And he's this really great Black kid that I had reached out to initially after George Floyd, just, you know, in an effort to have those awkward conversations, right? Saying, what can I do? Who can I talk to? How can I help? How can I get involved? And so we've been, you know, Skyping each other, like when we have the John Lewis service was on in the background, and during even the George Floyd service when Al Sharpton was preaching, and just sharing and talking to each other as we had those the TV on in the background, working from home. But just the other day, he messaged me, and just out of the clear blue sky, and shared how much he respected me for being willing to ask the awkward questions, right? And to thank me for being, you know, part of the movement, and that it gave him hope to know that even in his workplace, that there were people who, you know, were going to come alongside and continue to help this fight. So that really touched me, that, you know, he would reach out to me and, you know, just kind of make me feel like my discomfort in trying to have these conversations and ask these questions was of value and something that I should continue to try to do.
I just want to add that I get hope and inspiration by seeing and knowing, well, learning about and acknowledging the Black people who've come before, their resilience, their strength, their creativity. You know, those who came here and were enslaved, and the strength and the courage and the endurance that they have shown. Those who marched in the civil rights movement, facing police batons and dogs and water, and just seeing that inspires me to do what I can. And seeing the progress that has been made because of the sacrifices of those people inspires me. So while there's a lot of sad history, and it's painful, and it's hard to sometimes read about it or see it portrayed in movies, it's also inspiring to know that, you know, running in my blood and from my ancestors is that courage and strength and creativity that they have, that I have, and I can pass on to my daughter. And we may not make huge progress at any moment in time, but there is progress being made, and I just want to be a part of it, and I want my daughter to be a part of it, and we'll just keep moving that baton forward.
Yeah,
We also we can get strength from being involved in positive change. What we are doing right now, what all of us are doing right now, is a part of positive change in our society. We need to be able to look back on our week, on our month, on our year, and identify what we have done to make positive change in the world in which we live. That's inspiring.
Mhm.
That's motivating. You know, at the end of a week, when you say, I am tired, and you look back and you think, well, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this, and it's positive for the world in which I live. I am 61 years old, and of late, I have been thinking about my own mortality. To my knowledge, I don't have an incurable disease. I am not about to die. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I do realize I am not going to be here forever. And I have a 12-year-old child. And it makes me feel good. It is encouraging for me to know that there are people like yourselves, younger than I am, who will be in the world, who will be working alongside my child after I'm gone. It is encouraging to know that there are people fighting this fight outside my racial group, people who believe in and want to see a difference in our world. That's encouraging. That's motivating. That helps me keep walking.
Yeah.
Something that I've been trying to practice is letting go of righteousness. I feel like sometimes a lot of organizers and activists feel like they're alone in the fight, and that's not true. And that is a form of righteousness where we feel like we need to be the ones to end racism. And that's like an urgency distress pattern that I have, that I'm like, by the time I die, I want to have fixed racism. And I recognize that that's not going to happen. And
That's right.
that is, it's a really tough reality to think that like my existence on its own, even if I dedicate every single day, every single minute of my entire life to, you know, the fight, it's not going to be over. And so letting go of that righteousness and recognizing, like what you said, all I can do is hope that my impact has, you know, ripples into the generations after me. A common thing in like indigenous culture is this idea of like the seventh generation, and how we are connected to up to 7 generations behind us. And we want our actions to, you know, impact 7 generations after us. And so that's all we can hope for. We can't hope that like we're going to fix it. And that's something that I'm still trying to work on. But that recognizing that the burden becomes a lot easier when we recognize that we're not alone. We get to share, you know, the beauty of like fighting and loving each other and teaching the world to love each other with a lot of people of different races. And so remembering that we're in this together. And then something else that I've been trying to do is, like I said before, like recognize that what we're fighting for is to achieve liberation for all people. And a way that I like conceptualize that in relation to my like religious identity is, we often talk about like this idea of like heaven and earth at some moments being closer and farther apart from each other. And so it's like, how can we bring, if we are fighting towards liberation, you know, I hope that liberation looks like what heaven looks like. And so how do we bring those moments into the fight now? Again, like talking about what do we love about being people of color? That is a part of liberation. And knowing that liberation is grounded in joy and love and happiness and like all of the amazing things in the world, and that a movement for liberation cannot exist if we aren't creating liberation for ourselves while we're doing it. So having fun and like enjoying each other and talking about like the amazing things that people of color do and the amazing art that people of color make, and just loving each other in our wholeness is really something that has helped me find sustenance.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that idea that we are not the only ones in the fight. Do you remember Elijah when he finished with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel? Do you remember he was thrown into this depression, thinking, I am the last prophet. I am the only one who is fighting against Baal. And God had to send a messenger to him to say, there are, Pastor, you helped me with the number. Was it 700 more prophets?
Indeed.
700 more people engaged in the same struggle that he was in. You are right on target with remembering that we are not alone in this fight.
Yes. And let me say, I think this conversation could, as I said, it could go on a long time, but I think this is we've been at it about an hour. I think this is a great place for us to end the conversation. And let me just say to the folks who are watching it out there, you are not alone in this. If you are looking for a place where you might belong, you are welcome in this spiritual community. And if you are a person who's looking for how to join the movement to bring reconciliation into our world, there is a place for your voice here as well. And so we welcome you. And I'm so thankful to all of you for taking the time to have this conversation, and more so than taking the time to have this conversation. It's the work. I'm thankful for the work that you have done this week already. I'm thankful for the work of racial justice and reconciliation that I'm confident that God will lead you all into in the week ahead. So thank you. God bless. I'm going to turn off the recording. We're going to stay here for a moment, but God bless. And we look forward to being together with you the next time that we have a conversation.